Hello, everyone, and welcome along. Today, I have with me a real treat for you guys. This is a man who represented Great Britain at the highest level for 14 years. He in the 400 meters and in the 4x400. He won 15 major championship medals, including gold at the Worlds, the Europeans, the Commonwealth, and also that memorable silver medal at the Atlantic Olympics in 1996. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I have with me Roger Black. Roger, welcome along.
Hello, thank you. Nice introduction.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, I know. What a list of achievements. Does that sound weird when you hear it back?
You know, the best thing about as you get older, I mean, I actually get my pension in 2 weeks' time. I'm 55 in 2 weeks' time. But now there's a thought. The great thing is, the older you become, the better you become in people's minds. So, you know, it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
And does that translate in your friends, or do they just find you less interesting as time gets on?
My children absolutely have no interest in me at all. Certainly from an athletic point of view, they're more interested that I did do Strictly Come Dancing and MasterChef one day years ago. Athletics. No, I think they're quietly proud. But yeah, look, you know, it's an interesting one when you've done something, and you'll always be known for something you did such a long time ago. And it's great. I mean, I look, blimey, no complaints here. But it is interesting to know that you're sort of your best days are way behind you.
Well, I hope not. But I guess I want to dig into, because we've got a lot of people who watch this who are avid running fans,
Okay.
and I want to just go into you really and how it all began. So, how did it get started? Were you like always a sporty kid who was good at everything?
Yes, I was definitely a sporty kid. I like most Olympians, you know, I loved sport, but it wasn't athletics. I loved football, cricket, rugby, team sports, but I was that kid who was just quick. You know, I was always quicker than everybody, but I never did athletics. I never joined an athletics club as a kid. I was at a grammar school, so it was very much about rugby and cricket, and it was very much about going to university and being a doctor and whatever. And I still think the two most interesting things about me is I was prevented from doing sport early on because I have a leaking heart valve. So at the age of 11, that was diagnosed. So I wasn't allowed. I've never did cross country my whole life. Brilliant result. But I wasn't allowed to do competitive sport for a year. And so that's interesting. But the most interesting thing is I never dreamt of being an athlete. I never thought I'd be an athlete. I wasn't, you know, it didn't appeal to me. I knew I was quick, but I had no reference to how good I was. I became an athlete because I messed up my A-levels. And I wanted to read medicine at university. I messed up my maths A level, and I had to retake it. And it was in that year that my best friend in the sport, who jumped for Hampshire, you know, I ran for Hampshire, but that was because I was good at it. A guy called Fayaz Ahmed, who's Fuzz Khan. He's the Olympic high jump coach now. He's a national coach. And it was Fuzz who basically said, look, you are so much better than you think. And he's the person who made me go across to Southampton. I lived in not far from Southampton, and go and train with Chris Akabusi and Todd Bennett, who had just come back from the Los Angeles Olympic Games. And there they were in their amazingly, you know, Nike and Adidas tracksuits. You know, they were real sort of, you know, heroes. And I was this sort of spotty teenager who had a woolly jumper and some sort of Stan Smith training shoes. And I got into this Mike Smith's training group. And I found out very quickly how good I was because I just chased them up a hill every day. And it was Chris Akabusi who very early on said to me, you're the best I've ever seen. And that was it, really. And it just happened so quickly. But if I hadn't messed up my maths A level, I wouldn't be doing this, and I certainly wouldn't have run. And it changed my life. So that failure of an exam ended up in me becoming an athlete.
And it was age 19 that you started to really break through. So literally the next year, right?
Yeah. Well, I got my first international vest that indoor season. Yeah. So within 3 months, it's ridiculous. But I guess I was an example of a kid who had a lot of talent, but you don't know how good you are until you have a reference. And I had no idea I was that good. I know I was pretty good. You know, I'd won the Hampshire Championships. I was fast. But I had no idea I was that good. But of course, when you're chasing Todd Bennett and Chris Akabusi every day and eventually you catch them, you know you must be pretty good. And I didn't think of anything. I just ran. And ran. And within a year was European junior champion. And a year later was Commonwealth and European champion. And then things started to go wrong. But, you know, because you get injured. But and I mean, it sounds arrogant, but I spend a lot of my life now working with Steve Backley, the great javelin thrower. And what we learned through our sport was that talent is not enough, because at Olympic level, everyone's talented. So clearly I was talented enough. If you're talented and you can stay healthy, that was enough, and you train hard, to become European and Commonwealth champion and British record holder. But that was never going to be enough to one day stand on the Olympic rostrum, because injuries get in the way. You're up against the likes of Michael Johnson and people like that. So I learned early on that I was very lucky to be given a degree of talent that gave me a shot at the Olympics, but it was never going to be enough to guarantee success. So I find that fascinating, because all Olympic athletes have been given that ticket to the party. They're all talented. I mean, I've not met anyone who wasn't, but they all know that it's your attitude and what you bring to the table and the people you train with and all of that results in the medals. It's not just your talent. And I learned that early on, because I broke my foot, within a year of being Commonwealth European champion. It was taken away.
I definitely want to come into the injuries, because obviously that was a big part of your career. But I'm really curious about that first year where you went from being a regional champion to being European champion. And how was did you suddenly become really arrogant, or were you just bemused by it all? Or were you just like, actually, I was always meant to be here? What were you like as a young kid?
I never thought I was particularly arrogant. I felt out of place, because I didn't feel like I was like everybody else, because I hadn't been doing it for a long time. You just do it. It was wonderful. You're getting up every day and you're going training. You're going out in the evening with this amazing bunch of athletes. Yes, you've got your Olympians like Chris Akabusi and Todd Bennett, but you've got loads of other guys and girls who are all loving athletics. You've got a group of 20, 30 of you every day, loads of banter. And the truth is, I was just a young kid and I was just running. I had no injuries. I would get up, I was tired, I was aching, I'd get up, and I was loving it. It was fantastic. And I just did it. And I really believe if you've got some talent and you stay healthy and you're in a great training group, I wasn't on my own. I was surrounded by all these great athletes. You're going to do okay. So I was so in the moment. I was loving it. It was new. It was fresh. And meeting Chris and then meeting Daley Thompson, who are two of my greatest friends. As a young kid, you're thinking, this isn't happening to me. And then you become European and Commonwealth champion and British record holder. And you go, well, hang on a minute. How did this happen?
And I think that's the really interesting thing about talking to you and hearing you speak about it is you always seem so surprised. Yeah. Like you don't have that sense of arrogance that some of the super elite people do have. You're always kind of like, well, one day I was doing this and now I'm here.
Well, it's true. But I think it helped that I didn't come from that. Remember, I wasn't a kid who had pressure put on him by, expectation. I was, and many of our top athletes, Chris Akabusi came to it late through the army. Linford Christie came to it late. It's quite an interesting study. If I was that young kid, age 10, 11, who everyone's telling you how good you are and you're winning races all the time and you're going to follow this program and one day you're going to go to the Olympics, I wouldn't have made it, because I would have just thought, oh, no way. This is too much pressure. You got to understand, for me, this was just like, I was going to go, I did actually read medicine briefly at university. I was going to become a doctor. And my friends were at university or getting jobs. And I'm running every day, getting on the telly, spending a few months in California, eventually getting paid, not a lot, but enough to wear some training shoes. It was ridiculous. It was fantastic. But I think the thing it gave me a passion. I became very passionate about athletics, and it's just having that focus and that passion. But for me also just being around such great people and being on that journey with Chris Akabusi, and it was great. But there was pressure, there was expectation, but I came to it with no expectation. I came to it fresh. So there was never any burnout for me, because when you start at 18, you're not going to burn out, are you? You're going, wow, this is fantastic. If you've been doing it since you were 10 and you get to 18 and you're no longer a junior or 19 and it isn't quite going your way, you can see why teenagers get lost from the sport, because they just had enough. I did the smoking and the drinking. I had the teenage years. I honestly left. I remember sitting in a pub after doing my A-levels with 3 other friends, and we all said, what do you think we'll be doing in 5 years' time? I could honestly bring any of them out, and they would never say that I said, "Oh, I'm going to be going to the Olympic Games." It just was never the discussion. So when it happened so quickly, it was just fresh. It was just fun. It was just a great opportunity. I was very blessed, very blessed.
And I think there's maybe a lesson in there about sort of hidden potential. Maybe there's loads that, maybe not to the extent of going to the Olympics, but maybe there's much more that we can all do that we don't see.
100%. And I think, running is very obvious. It's very obvious if you can run fast. It's a very obvious thing, so it's a lot easier. But I think you don't know how good you are at something until you surround yourself with people who are a lot better than you. And you can find out that actually you're better than you thought you were. Because if you have no reference, you just stay at the level you are.
Yeah.
And I think I'm a great example of that, because I had no reference as a kid. At school, the only running we did was school sports. That was the only athletics we did, one day a year. I chose not to join an athletics club, so I had no reference there. I mean, I knew I was good. I won the Hampshire Championships, but I didn't know I was that good. And I think there's a lot of latent talent in people. But the key is, if you don't get into that environment, you may never find out how good you are at anything. You've just got to give it a go.
Amazing. It's such an inspiring story. I think the other bit, which, as you mentioned earlier, is really interesting, is the heart condition. And do you want to talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked about this. I'm much more aware of it now, at my age now. It's a weird one. I went to my school medical when I was 11, and the doctor listened to my heart and said, "Well, hang on a minute." I was then referred to the cardiothoracic specialist in Southampton General Hospital, and I've been seeing him every year for the last 44 years. I'm on my third specialist. One of my aortic valve doesn't work properly. It's as simple as that. So, but clearly it hasn't been a problem. And for some people who have exactly the same problem, it's life changing. I mean, they're out of breath most of the time. So, it's an interesting one. So, throughout my career, I would go every year and be checked, be attached to all the machines. They'd see how my heart was functioning, where it was. And every year I knew there was a chance they would say, "You're going to have to stop." It obviously never happened. By the way, the only year I didn't go to my appointment was 1996. Because it didn't matter what the doctors say. It wasn't going to stop.
You're going.
I have a capacity, and I think a lot of athletes have this. You are so focused on what you can control and on moving forward that you create blind spots and you block out things in your life. That's why many athletes are dysfunctional emotionally. You are incredibly focused. And I think I blocked it out. I didn't. My father worried about it all the time. Chris Akabusi worried about it, but he was aware of it because he was with me every day. But it never was part of my mindset because I didn't want it to be an excuse. I just didn't want it to be an excuse. So it was never a big secret, but I never publicly talked about it because I could easily have used it as an excuse. And I felt fine. So
turns out you didn't need any
weird
excuses.
I'm much more aware of it now and I respect it more now than when I was an athlete.
Yeah, I mean, and it obviously didn't hold you back because you did pretty well.
No, it was okay. Look, it might have even helped me. My heart there is a theory that my heart overcompensated for its inefficiency. It's just a theory.
So
but
maybe that gave you the extra.
Well, I was never more out of breath than the next person, and I had a very low heartbeat, and I did recover very quickly. So,
but I think there's another thing there, there's another thing there which is definitely worth talking about, which is these limiting factors that we're told about that maybe could stop you from doing something. It may actually not be a limiting factor. No. In fact, in your case, it may have even possibly helped you.
It may have done. A limiting factor is a limiting factor if you focus on it. Don't get me wrong. Everyone should get the heart checked out. But remember, from a very early age, every year I was having my heart checked out. Most people don't have that luxury. So as long as the doctors could measure it and it was fine, there was never a worry. But yeah, I mean, we can all create limiting factors in sport. I mean, in my game, limiting factor is, well, obviously they're all on drugs. So that's initially a limiting factor. We never talked about it. We never thought about it. We never had that discussion because we knew it would become a limiting factor if we thought everyone's on drugs. And there are so many more of those, but you should I guess the top athletes are programmed to focus on the positives and not to look at the limiting factors.
100%. And I think it's really interesting, that mindset. And I guess mindset's obviously another point that I wanted to touch on with you, because you obviously was really strong mentally, especially with, there were some injury issues in your career. How did you ride through that mentally?
Well, thank you for that. But I didn't feel strong mentally at the time. One of my coaches, Mike Whittingham, described me as a swan, graceful on the surface, but paddling like mad underneath. I think that's not a bad description of me as a person. So I wasn't supremely confident. Myself and Steve Backley talk a lot about this. You know, you have the impression and you get into that character when people are watching you have been confident, but underneath, I think most people are challenged. And where I think I was very fortunate is that I was very fortunate to be surrounded on a regular basis by a lot of people, but two people in particular who were just amazing: Chris Akabusi and Daley Thompson. And what they taught me from a very early age was, one, Daley in particular was love every moment of this. He was so passionate about it. But me and Chris also knew that it was all about the championships. Nothing else mattered every season. It didn't matter about running a fast time on a hot night in Lausanne. What mattered was, how are you going to do in the one championship? You know, can you go through the rounds in the 400 meters? Can you prepare for that and deliver that? And that was, you know, when you say, you know, I was good under pressure, that was because I prepared for that and I thrived under that situation. I didn't see a championship as a pressure situation. I saw it as an opportunity. I loved that. One-off races, actually, I didn't do that well throughout my career, if you analyze it. But give me 4 races in 5 days, you know, one-on-one, not one-on-one, but, you know, racing, really the purest form of athletics, when it mattered. For some reason, I thrived in that environment, and I enjoyed that. But things like overcoming injury, I had to understand early on that the mental side and your behavior and the way you think is and the decisions you make are the things, you know, and many athletes don't come back from a bad injury because they just don't take the time, they don't get the right advice, and they don't get it. They think it's just going to happen. It doesn't. You have to make it happen. And I come back to it. I was lucky to have good people around me, and I guess I asked good questions of a lot of people.
I think it must be a really dark time, though, when, especially after the initial early success that you had in your career, and then to go out.
Yeah, it was awful.
And, you know, from an outsider looking in, it looked like you were supremely confident, you had it all handled, but clearly it's not like that. So did you do anything to keep your mind strong in those dark times?
I can see, I blocked a lot of it out now, but I mean, it was awful. I mean, within what's the chronological order? By mid 1987, I was Commonwealth European champion 86. By 87, I was having problems, and by the end of 87, I'd broken my foot. Missed the 88 Olympics, missed 89, and came back in 1990 to retain my European title. Went into massive debt. But the hardest thing is that you're watching other people win the medals and win the races, and you can't do anything about it. And it's lonely because, you know, even Chris is my closest friend. You know, he was focusing on his career. You know, I wasn't there to train with him much. I had to make big changes. I had to leave Mike Smith's training group because Mike wasn't set up to help someone come back from injury. I was lucky enough to work with a guy called Mike Whittingham, who saved my career. You know, you just learn. I read a lot of books, listened to a lot of tapes. It was very lonely. But the thing is that I still had, it's just so corny, I still had the dream. I still had the dream and the vision of one day standing on the Olympic rostrum. And I combined that with knowing that I was still lucky enough to have enough talent that if I could get back, I would have a shot at it. Yeah. And I was young enough to get over a broken foot, but it took a long time. The hardest thing for me was in 1993. So I got two dogs fighting down here. Okay.
That's all right.
In 1993, I got glandular fever. I missed a year with glandular fever. That's the hardest thing I ever experienced, because when you have a broken foot, people can see you're injured. When you have glandular fever, you look fine, but you feel terrible. And people question you here. And I started to question myself. And that was the biggest challenge of my career. And I managed to come back from that eventually. But I respect any sports person that comes back from injury. You know, because many don't, because it is tough, and you do have to you do have to accept you can't do what came so naturally to you when you were healthy and young. You can't do it like that again, so you have to find another way, and you have to be creative, and you have to understand your limitations, but at the same time you have to find better ways to run the 400 meters. And I do believe that I don't know if I would have won my Olympic silver medal in '96 if I hadn't gone through the problems when I was younger.
I was going to ask.
It kept me going. It kept me going.
So I was going to ask that question. So when you got to '96 and you get the silver medal, you're on the road on the podium. Talk me. How does that feel?
Yeah, '96. Not just the Olympics, but '96 from. I mean, what people don't necessarily know is I had a knee operation the end of '95. I'd had a terrible 1995. I stood behind the line in the World Athletics 400 meter final, World Championship final. I don't remember where it was now. 1995. And I remember going down. You know, I had my knee was hurting, my hamstrings were hurting. I went down to the line, waiting for the gun to go, and the voice in my head said, I remember exactly what it said. The voice in my head said, "What the hell are you doing here?" I think I came 7th. I was just aching. I wasn't ready. I was nowhere near. You know, I was good enough to make the world final, but I was on about. Yeah, I was in a terrible shape. I had knee operations shortly after that, and it worked. And I don't know. I knew '96 was my last chance. I took accountability for my career completely, for my training, and I just started to. I don't know. Lots of things happen, but it just sort of you can just sense when actually my knee's not hurting. I feel okay, and I started to run faster and faster and faster. Had a great training group. Wasn't getting injured, and when I got to the line for the final in Atlanta, I absolutely can tell you I've never felt more ready in my life. I was on top of my game. I'd not put a foot wrong. It was extraordinary. It's a feeling I hadn't had ever before. It's not like I had it back in 1986. In '86, I was just young, fit, talented, and just running. But in '96, I was about as ready and complete at 30 years old than I'd ever been before. And it was an amazing feeling. And yeah, and it worked. And I didn't beat Michael. I was never going to beat Michael, but I won that silver medal, and it was an incredible feeling. It was an incredible feeling. Yeah.
Do you ever watch that race back? Because no,
because the problem with that race, if you watch it, is Michael's so far ahead that I look rubbish. And so I'm
no, you don't.
Or watch it because you know my kid. Oh, you're rubbish. He beat you by miles. Yeah, I know, but I still ran 44. Yeah. It doesn't matter. No.
But I watched that race back this morning just to remind myself of it. And the last 100 meters, if you haven't seen it, go onto YouTube and watch it. The last 100 meters is fingertip stuff, even though I know where you're going to finish, because it gets close and then you just seem to pull away. You just don't seem to tire.
I had rehearsed that race so many times, and I was so. I mean, I won't go into the details, but I'd learned to run the race differently. Do you know what I actually did? I actually made the race easy rather than hard. When you get good at sport, you can sometimes really complicate it. Jonathan Edwards complicated the triple jump after he became world record holder, because it just stopped being jumping into a sandpit. It became something far more complicated. I made the 400 meters more complicated than it needed to be, and I learned to relax. I learned to run the right race for me. And for me, I won't break it down, but there was one thing I knew. I knew that, with the exception of Michael Johnson, that if I was ahead of anybody at 300 meters, no one was going to come past me for the last 100. I made sure of that. Now, up until that 96, I'd always been vulnerable for the last 100 meters. But I knew that if you're not ahead of me at 300 meters, you're not going to come past me. And that's why my last 100 was, you know, I mean, I looked pretty terrible, but I was running the best last 100 I've run. And that's what I did in 96. And I wish I'd learned that 10 years earlier, but hey.
It's a compilation of experience. But I mean, it's such, if you haven't seen the video, look it up. It's amazing.
Well, the amazing thing about Atlanta, of course, is that you've got to put it into context that, you know, Michael Johnson It was in Atlanta. Michael Johnson had his gold shoes. It was all about Michael Johnson. And a few days later, he went on to break the world record in the 200 meters. But for me, and I have a connection, a bond with Michael that we'll have forever because of that moment. I shared his history and he shared a bit of mine. And we had a wonderful moment on the rostrum where there's a lovely picture of him. Sorry.
That's all right.
There's a lovely picture of him with a tear coming down his cheek. And whenever I see him, he always blames, he says, I made him cry because he's let his guard down on that rostrum. Because when we stood behind the rostrum, he was like a robot because he was already thinking about the 200 meters. He wasn't in the moment. He wasn't appreciating what he just achieved. And I had a few little words with him and said, come on, Michael, this is what it's all about. And he started crying. But to have shared that moment with Michael is such a blessing for me. I mean, really, you know, if you're going to come second to somebody, make sure it's Michael Johnson or Usain Bolt. You know, it's okay.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful moment to be in Atlanta, be part of Michael Johnson's history. Makes it that little bit more special. I guess it's like how Catherine Merry feels with Kathy Freeman in the 400 meters in Sydney. You're part of something incredibly special.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was very fortunate.
I think it's an amazing story. It's such an amazing journey of your career, and it's just that never give up, never quit, never say die, because you don't know what greatness is at the end of it.
Yeah, but I was also listen to what people say, and when I was injured once, thinking of giving up, an ex-athlete said to me, one thing you got to know is, as an athlete, you're a long time retired, which basically says, it basically says, don't go too early, because when it's over, it's over. It's not a sport you come back to. And I always remembered that, so I hung in for as long as I could.
Oh, it's amazing. I think so. Are you still running now? I mean, do you ever go back to the track or?
No, never go back to the track. Why would I go back to the track? Why do you don't run 400 meters again? But I run every day, pretty much. My wife and I go for a jog with the two dogs that you can probably hear. And I just, it's not about performance. It's not about speed. It's about just staying healthy and keeping moving. So we go for a half-an-hour jog in the woods, and we do it most days. I'm a great fan of a little bit of exercise regularly. And then, of course, I get on my Roger Black treadmill every day in the evening, or my Roger Black bike. New online shop opening soon. And yeah, I respect my health far more now than when I was an athlete. I just try and keep moving as much as possible. It's vital. It's absolutely vital. As you get older, it really is. Yeah.
And I'm curious, because obviously you're a recognizable face. So when you're out just taking a casual run in the woods for your half an hour, do you ever get people trying to race you? Or...
Well, where we go, you don't see that many people. You don't see the old people. We are shuffling. But I have, when I've been out on my own, which doesn't happen very often, I did a few months ago. I was out in the woods, and I was at the bottom of a very long hill, and it was one of those hills where I thought, when I was an athlete, this is the hill we would have trained on. And I was going up it with the dogs, and this guy came alongside me and turned around and clocked me, and he said, "Oh, bloody ass, what's your like?" He said, "Well, yeah." And he was fit, and he said, "Oh, well, can I run with you?" I said, okay. And he said, "Let's run to the top of the hill." And I'm like, I haven't run a hill for years, and I tried to, we got to the top of the hill, and I said, "All right, mate, it's time for you to go." By the time he'd gone round the corner, I was collapsed on the floor. So I could fake it for about 5 minutes, but I couldn't have carried it on. But you've always got that competitive spirit in you.
I love that it kicks in and you raced and then died afterwards.
Yeah, I let him go out of sight, and then I was like, oh.
So yeah, Roger, that's been absolutely brilliant. I've really enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you so much for coming along and giving us your time. It's been a real pleasure. And we will see you all at the National Running Show South in July. Yeah, I look forward to that. I remember doing the running show in Birmingham a few years ago, and it was absolutely fantastic. And it's lovely because I'm not really involved with athletics that much. I don't go to the meetings that much now and again. But being in a room with loads of people who love running, it was just wonderful, I have to say. And I remember going away from that thinking, people who run are really nice, And I know that sounds corny, but it's just a lovely space to be in. So I'm really looking forward to Farnborough, especially it's only about 10 minutes down the road. So brilliant. That's a good win. Well, we shall look forward to seeing you. Thank you so much for your time, Roger. Cheers. Thank you.